Hello, good evening, good afternoon, and good morning, everyone. Welcome to Connect Africa. So we are here on our session, a lengthy one, what we used to do with Kwame. Now, for today, our topic is geopolitical frontiers, Africa in global context. Now, for this, of course, we have Kwame, and today, interestingly, we are going to reflect an article that is written by him after the African Development Bank has published an article. So he actually reflected on that on his article. So welcome, Kwame.
Thank you, Mahlet. Thank you very much, and greetings to everyone who's out there, who's watching Connect Africa. We want to encourage you to keep supporting the channel, keep supporting the platform, because this is the only platform that is bringing like real issues, and not just talking about them, but people who are working on the ground to change the situation. As you all know, we Connect Africa is associated with the African Continental Unity Party. We were here with the team last time to do a presentation, and we are about building or rebuilding the African continent. So, as Mallet has mentioned, we're going to reflect on the report which was published the 2020, and I've been talking about this actually a couple of times. The Africa Development Bank published the 2024 African Economic Outlook. They looked at the African economy and how it is performing, and then they looked at the future of the continent, how they see it, how the bank sees it, because they publish these reports every single year. But of
Yes.
course, what shocked us very much and what pushed Mallet to organize this program is the fact that the Africa Development Bank is saying if things go at the pace they are going at this particular moment for Africa, it will take 100 years to catch up, just to catch up with the rest of the world where it is currently. Because remember, by the time we finish our 100 years at this particular pace, they will not be in the same place because they are also moving forward. So then this requires us, of course, to reflect extensively on what is really the challenge and what is the problem and what is the solution consequently.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. So this is the article, and I would like to read the first paragraph of it because, as it shocked me, probably it will shock other people. So yeah, the 2024 African Development Bank Africa Economic Outlook Report, a continent in crisis, calling for urgent action to address a failed system. Of course, it's not African Development Bank that's calling for urgent action. It's Kwame's article. Now, the 2024 Africa Economic Outlook Report by the African Development Bank should serve as a wake-up call for every African who genuinely cares about the continent's future. According to the report, it could take Africa a staggering 108 years to catch up with the rest of the world as its current growth trajectory. This stark prediction underscores the gravity of the economic challenges Africa faces and highlights the need for immediate and coordinated action. Now, this one is the interesting part. While the continent, now Kwame is explaining from where this comes from. So while the continent is expected to grow at 3.7% in the year we are now, which is 2024, with a projected growth of 4.2% for 2025. This progress is undermined by an alarming trend, which is Africa is losing an estimated $587 billion annually due to what the African Development Bank calls it leakage, or we call it illicit financial flow. Okay, so now before even we move to the other things, unpack it really. First of all, as I read it, really, it makes me like sick. It makes me feel sick for what we are, trying here our best to inform people, to awaken people. It just makes you, to say the least, discouraged and hopeless. As you said, by the time that 108 years is finished, again maybe another 108 years, because the world will not be the same place as the rest of the world. So what does this 580 billion dollar represents, in what form? Like, how can we understand it? Like, unpack that for us, and then we move to the next question. What does that mean?
Yeah, so let me just first give you a background of what the African Development Bank, before I come to that question, what the African Development Bank is trying to portray here. Uh, the report itself, for those who really care, like I said in the article, who really care about this African continent, it should raise an alarming bells it should raise alarming bells in all our ears as Africans, because the future of the continent is in jeopardy. We are in a crisis. Okay, there is not going to be survival. And the African Development Bank, being an institution which has shares, huge shares, by the United States, Britain, and these countries, Japan, France, the institution itself is not African entirely. It is only African in name, the fact that it has a name called the Africa Development Bank. But the good thing that we have in there is that this institution is being run by Africans. That is the good thing. But even these Africans, of course, are getting instructions from the imperialistic powers or the colonial powers. So here and there, they manage to publish these particular reports. But even these reports, they publish them in a way that they don't want to offend the heads of state, to show them that the situation is dire. What you guys are doing is wrong. Okay, you need to change. You really need to change what you are doing. So this is what this particular report is presenting to the African people. And I encourage people to go out there and try and read at least some articles. You can even go into artificial intelligence and you ask it to summarize the report for you. At least you can read the snapshots of it, the main points of the report. This is very important. If you go to YouTube also, you can look for the channel, which is the Africa Development Bank's channel, and you will be able to watch some of the stuff there. This report, they presented part of it to Japan recently, because Japan is a partner in the African Development Bank. And that is where actually I picked some of this data. And it was alarming when I looked at the data. It was extremely alarming. And it is scary if you look at it. And people are downplaying this data. Now, what the African Development Bank is saying is that the current structure of the African continent is not serving well. And that includes the political structure. But of course, they call it governance. Okay, so they are saying that the current leadership structure, the current leadership is not doing a good job in defending the continent. That is number one. But of course, they said it. They use the politically correct language, and they called it governance. That there's governance, shortfall. They shortfall in governance and all this. But what they mean basically is that the current political leadership, whereby there's no political will to do things that are going to transform the continent structurally. To transform the structure of the continent, it means look at the continent and interlink it together and let the continent compete with the rest of the world. Okay, because the era in which we have arrived, it does not allow us to operate in small countries. We are competing with China. We are competing with all these big countries like India, the United States. We are competing with the European Union. The era in which we have entered, it does not allow us to compete when we are small countries. Sierra Leone, Togo, these countries, even if it's Mauritius and Botswana, they cannot compete. This is what they are talking about. But they are hiding, of course, these behind the big words. They are not telling you that this current order is bad that we are operating in, and it cannot defend the continent's interests. That is number one. Number two, they spoke about the financial architecture. The global financial architecture is against the African continent. And in this, I'm going to reflect on it in the data when I reach the question which you asked, the current global architecture, financial architecture, is actually against the African continent, is extracting wealth out of the African continent, is not in favor of the continent. And that data, we will look at it, extensively in itself. And then they said that the economy which we have designed, that which we are running as a continent, is very bad, is a wrong, type of economy, whereby we are still running on the extractive industry, whereby we are just selling material. We are not processing the resources. So 60 years into independence, and we are still not processing the material. We are not processing these materials into finished goods. So how can we then compete with the rest of the world? So these are the problems that the Africa Development Bank has identified, which are key, and they are very, important for people to read through and understand. Those ones who care about this African continent. Now, let me break down this figure which you asked. For me, this figure, which was published actually a few months ago in the presentation which was done a few months ago, which I said people can go on YouTube and even find it. You can look for Africa Development Bank, Japan, presentation, something like that, and then you type in there, Africa Economic Outlook 2024. You can search it on YouTube and listen to the whole of it. It's about 40 to 42 minutes, somewhere there. Now, there's a figure which was published by the Africa Development Bank, which is $587 billion. Now, this figure, if you superimpose it on the the African economy, the total GDP of the African economy is around $3.5 trillion, which is almost equivalent to that of India. All right. Now, $587 billion, that's an equivalent, that's almost $600 billion, which is equivalent to 17% of Africa's GDP. All right, that's equivalent to 17% of Africa's GDP. Now, this money is flowing out of the continent every single year. Every single year. Is not, over 5 years, over what? Is every single year. This is how much money is flowing out of the continent. $587 billion. Now, at what rate is this economy growing? The African economy is growing. 2024, the economy grew by 3.7%. Now, 2025, they say that it's going to grow by 4.2%. Now, there's a problem here, that the amount of money that is going out of your continent is bigger than even your economic growth, right? Your rate of economic growth. So the money you are adding on your economy due to your economic activities is far less than how much is flowing out. So it means that we are not growing as a continent. Rather, we are growing in negative. We are regressing. The economy is compressing, is regressing, is going backwards. That is what is happening with the African continent. And this is a situation which has not been, even the African Development Bank itself, it does not talk about it very much, because it will anger the so-called development partners. They don't even, bring it out so much for people to hear it, that the rate of growth for the African continent is so minuscule, is so small compared to how much money we are losing on this African continent. Now, number one, they broke down this figure of $587 billion. They broke it down. Number one on the list, which is leading the outflow of this money, which is taking this money, is the so-called international profit shifting, which is a figure of around $285 billion. $285 billion. Now, this money is not taken by Africans, it's taken by the so-called multinational companies. Multinational companies, the mining, the oil, and all these, the financial sector. Okay, we do not have control over these sectors as African people. And this is extremely dangerous. This is extremely dangerous. Okay, and the African Development Bank has said that governance, there's gaps in governance. It is because the African heads of state have left this situation to happen like this. They have not put their finger on this problem to be able to solve it. Now, number two, on the
Okay,
list.
before we move to number two, I really want it to be clear because if I don't understand, maybe somewhere in the audience also did not understand. Number one is what you call profit shifting. And these are not
International, the so-called international profit
multinational
shifting.
companies.
It
Okay,
means,
so
yeah.
what happens? You gave example mining because they are setting the price. How does that happen?
So let's go to Nigeria in this particular case. Let's go to Nigeria in this particular case. Now, if you go to Nigeria, since 1954, when Nigeria first discovered its oil, it has pumped out, uh, oil to the tune of, about $1 trillion. All right, just oil without any other economic activities. But now you see, Nigeria is not. You don't see that. You see even the amount of energy the country is producing for a population of almost 250 million people is 4,000 megawatts. 4,000 megawatts. Now, when you search for the money, the $1 trillion that has been pumped out of the crude oil that has come from Nigeria from 1954, you do not see it. You do not see it. So if they are talking about international profit shifting, these companies are stealing from the people. They underdeclare even their profits, and they exaggerate the expenses, for example. So you have this problem that they mine the resources from the continent, and they underdeclare what has been mined from the ground. You saw this problem that people like President Magufuli tried to solve it when he came to power. He had to rein in on a company called Barrick Gold, which is a Canadian company with attachments to Britain also, because these monopolies, they operate as octopuses. All right, they operate as octopuses. They hide how they are operating. Sometimes they say we are registered, for example, in Mauritius, or we are registered in Cayman Islands, and therefore you cannot tax us from here, where we are mining your gold from, because we are registered in Cayman Islands. We pay taxes in Cayman Islands. This has to do with what is called international double taxation, that you are not allowed to do double taxation on companies. Now, what they do is that they will go and register the company in these small islands like Cayman Islands, British Virgin Islands, where there is no taxation, and they will claim that they have paid taxes in that country, so they will not pay taxes in this your country. So this is the so-called profit shifting. And for those ones who want to understand deeply, they can go out there and read a book called The Treasure Islands. There's a book called The Treasure Islands. It basically deals with this problem of profit shifting. So this is the problem. So you find that all the profit they have made in your country, they want to take it and send it what they call their mother country, which is Cayman Islands, which are tax
So does
havens.
Cayman Island exist? It exists.
Yes, yes. So they like, for example, Hong Kong also for a long time was a tax haven. Mauritius, I think, to some extent, and then Panama. All these countries. There's countries which have Manhattan, all right, Delaware. So there are states in the United States, and these countries which are attached to Britain. They are controlled by Britain. Britain uses them as catch areas where they catch this money which is being stolen from these poor countries in the global south, and Britain takes that money in. So it is a system. It is an international system, which they said, as the African Development Bank said, is stacked up against the African continent. So this system was built in 1945. That is when it was built, and this is the same system that Nkrumah was warning the heads of state about, that we are in a very difficult situation. If we want to deal with this situation once and for all and effectively, as a continent, we have to unify our policy in every way, politically, foreign policy, economy, so that we can take care of our people. And of course, the African heads of state failed. Of course, we all failed, because we can't put the blame on one person. We all failed. We failed to unify the continent. So we opened the continent up to unrestricted exploitation, and that is what we are happening, and that is what profit shifting is about.
Okay, no, I don't want you to forget as well. There was number two for that. You were explaining what this $587 billion
Yeah.
represents.
So now at the top, when they broke down the figure which I said, which is the $587 billion,
Mhm.
uh, at the top, international profit shifting is 200, is leading almost with close to $300 billion that is they are taking from the continent. All right, mind you, the African continent has an infrastructure deficit annually of $200 billion. So this is money which could build roads, could build railways, improve their lives, cause industrialization, build the schools, build the hospitals for our people who are suffering. Go to country like Sierra Leone, 12% of the people have electricity. 88% of the people have nothing. They don't have electricity. They don't have access to electricity. You go to countries like Uganda, only about 30% of the people have access to electricity. 70% of the people have no access to electricity. 600 million people on the African continent have no access to electricity, completely no access to electricity. So we cannot develop the continent with this trend. And that is what, again, the African Development Bank is saying, that with this kind of trend, we cannot, something needs to change. Otherwise, we're going to spend another century, a full century, to be able to reach where other countries are currently are. So at the top, that is the international profit shifting. Number two, that is the corruption. Then corruption came in at $145 billion. So corruption is about 50% of the international profit shifting. And this is where people also need to understand that this narrative, this false narrative, which always is pushed around, that of saying that Africans are corrupt, is the
Mhm.
corruption is the problem on the African continent. This is not true. The data itself points out the facts. The facts are that at the top of stealing from the continent is the international cartels, is the United States. It was the report, for example, the report on illicit financial outflow, which was published in 2021 by the United Nations, pointed out that most of the money that is flowing out of the African continent is going to the United States, New York, Switzerland, Paris, Brussels, and London, and all the other tax havens. That's where the money that is flowing from the African continent is going. So number two is the corruption, which comes in at 145. So I wanted to make that clear, that the major issue on the African continent is not corruption. The major issue is neocolonialism. That neocolonialism has sophisticated systems of sucking wealth out of the continent. And as we are seeing, they are sucking twice the amount that corruption is causing on the African continent, which is at $285 billion. Now, at number three, that's where the illicit financial outflow, which was published also by the United Nations, at $90 billion, 90 billion illicit financial outflow. This is also by international companies, multinational companies. Okay, and again, the UN report cited mining companies specifically. They are the ones who are leading. And you can talk of gold, you can talk of uranium, what Niger has been fighting to take back its resources from France. So these are the countries that are robbing Africa. Gold and all these oil, the mining of oil that is happening on the cobalt, copper. In Zambia, we have Swiss companies over there, and London, and British companies in Zambia. They are sucking the copper out of the country, while the people are remaining poor, and nothing for them. So this is the situation that we have. And who is enabling this? That's the number two, which we said is the African heads of state, the current African heads of state, that they are complicit in this affair. That is why they are at number two. At the top, is the international companies and countries. Number two is the African heads of state, which is at 145. That's at least my interpretation. And number three, again, the international companies come in again with another method, which is called the illicit financial outflow. Now, at number four is what is called the poor risky perception. Poor risky perception costs the continent about $74 billion every single year. Now, what does this mean? The ratings, international rating agencies, we heard about the African Union. that it wants to start its own rating agency where it will
Mhm.
rate the African continent and its economies fairly. And it was driven, the African Union was driven by the fact that the international agencies like Fitch and all the others, they rate the continent unfairly. They exaggerate the risk on the African continent. And in this, they work with the international media, their media, the Western media, BBC and all these, in exaggerating the risk on the continent. And this ends up uh, losing the continent about $74 billion. So these combined together is what makes up the $587 billion that is being lost, or close to $600 billion that is being lost from the continent. So with this kind of trend, we cannot take care of our people. We cannot build the infrastructure. We cannot build the hospitals because it is so huge. This amount of money is so huge because the continent should be growing at this rate, not losing money at that kind of rate. It should be growing at 17% consistently, maybe for the next 10 years for us to be able to catch up. Because if you look at it, we are way behind the rest of the world when it comes to the comparison. If you compare our population to our GDP, we should be around $18 trillion. Our economy as a continent should be around $18 trillion, but we are $3.5 trillion. So somebody is stealing from us. Somebody is taking from the African people, and this problem, of course, has to be solved in one way or the other.
Wow. So that's really a lot. I just have to let it think, try. Uh, Now, I think you've kind of answered my next question because I was going to ask who are the owners, who is doing this. So, these international uh, companies, so-called international companies, but like cartels, and then of course our governments are also part of it. They are an accomplice to this. But tell me, how can you explain how we find ourselves, or Africa find itself again and again in this trap every time challenges of development and this kind of discouraging thing? Uh, yeah, how?
Yeah.
Where
So
did it wrong so big?
yeah. So the problem is sophisticated. So, but this question, I will start answering it with Nkrumah's observation in the 1960s. He said that the capitalist system is so complicated for newly independent African states to deal with it alone. Okay, he said that the capital. Let me repeat that the capitalist system is so sophisticated, is so complicated for newly independent African states to deal with it with it alone in their small countries, because like it beats my understanding sometimes. It beats my understanding sometimes that I struggle to explain it. It is so sophisticated. The system is so sophisticated that you needed a lot of power to deal with it, which the small states did not have. They did not have the tools. They were not equipped with the tools of dealing with the system which was created after 1945. Okay, that is the number one. Okay, now on the other hand, you have African heads of state who come to power and they are not prepared. Okay, they are not prepared. They are almost operating in the same way in which they operated in the heads of state operated in the 1960s. They think that if you get to power, that you are an independent country. You are an independent country, so you can operate on the international stage because you have a seat at the United Nations, you have a flag, you have an anthem.
Yeah.
They think that you are an independent country, which is not true in itself. So there has been lack of of appreciation of these facts. This is another problem, and this has come to be seen as negligence, of course, on the part of the African heads of state. Others, it has been outright selfishness, even if they understand. And others, it is sort of like hopelessness, They have just given up, and they know, some of them know, like people like Akufo-Addo, when he came to power, he said that it is not right that the Ghanaian people are outside the mainstream economy. Okay, he said that it is not right. It is not right that the Ghanaian people who own this country are outside the mainstream economy. But this man, he never went ahead to do anything about this. So, and what he meant by this, actually, it had been this had been mentioned earlier on by one of the richest men in Ghana. He's called Sam Jonah. He said that how can an economy run when the Ghanaian people don't own uh, the economy? The economy is owned by foreigners. The major sectors which are running the country, the major exports, oil, for example, gold, okay, cocoa, and the financial sector, all of them are owned by foreigners. How can you run an economy like this when foreigners are the ones controlling the major sectors, your major sectors of the economy? You can't run an economy like this. So Akufo-Addo, noticed this, but then he went ahead to leave it as it is. He never instituted any structural changes to change this, dangerous paradigm. And this is what the African Development Bank is talking about: the shortage, the shortfall in governance. People who are committed to the African continent. These people are not committed to the African continent. So what he resorted to as President Akufo-Addo is resorted, when they fail, they resort to rhetoric of democracy. Oh, democracy is this. Now democracy, we are democracy. We are we are a democracy. And therefore, people have to be patient. This is after seeing that the challenges before them, they cannot, handle them. So they resort to this kind of fake rhetoric to calm the population down, so that the population will not riot or will not demonstrate against them. So it's a complicated system to answer your question internationally, and that is what is called the international system. What the African Development Bank has said that the international system is stacked up against the African continent. It's a neocolonial system, and that system is a continuation of the era of slavery and colonialism, which is for the extraction of wealth from the poor countries in the global south. Currently, the most vulnerable of them is the African continent. So that process continues until you have reasonable leadership on the continent. So that system now, combine it with heads of state who are not committed to the African continent and its well-being, like how Nkrumah was, then that is where we are. That is what puts us in a position where we are as a continent.
I know time is a constraint here, but final question, Kwame. Is there a way out? Is there a hope?
Mahlet, I think that there's a way out. There is a way out. We don't have any option. We have to organize. All right. The only option which we have as a people, we have to follow. We have to fall within the tempo of the geopolitical events that are happening now. When President Xi Jinping was in Moscow, he went to visit President Putin. He said that the changes which are happening today have never happened in 100 years. All right. So we have to fall within this tempo, this change that is happening globally, when a lot of these countries are distracted. You see that the United States now under Trump is going to fold back in. It's going to look inwards. This is an advantage for us to put pressure on the heads of state, on the African heads of state, and many of them have to go. Okay, because the continent will not develop with them in power. Okay, so that is why organizations like the African Continental Unity Party are very critical at this particular moment. The progressive forces all over the continent have to be mobilized. And this is not an easy task. Okay, I wish it was easy, but it is not an easy one. But it has to be done because it is imperative. It is imperative. And the data is showing us. The data from the African Development Bank is showing us that things have to be changed. the current pace. The report, that's what they say. The report says that at the current pace where we are going, the the future of the continent is in chaos, is in doubt. Okay, so it means that we have to invest everything that we can. We have to put everything at stake. Everything has to be at stake. We have to organize, and that organization, it means that the various states, the people there have to get up. They have to get up. People have to get up and take responsibility that we cannot have a continent led in this way. And that is as real as it can get. And we are doing it. The African Continental Unity Party is doing it because there's no option. If we want to make things better, we have to do it. So the African diaspora have to play a huge role, a huge role. The independence movement itself was driven by the African diaspora. They came from outside to come and correct things on the continent. People like Nkrumah almost was a diaspora because he had lived in the outside the continent for 10 years before he came back to fight for independence. And all the other leaders of the independence movement, the Jomo Kenyatta's and majority of them, okay, the Haile Selassie's, all of them, they just came back to help the continent. So the African diaspora has to play a major role. But the work has already started. We have already started the work as the African Continental Unity Party. And the way out is for us to take power. That is the first stage. That is the strategy of the African Continental Unity Party, that we have to have people who are for Pan-Africanism taking power in the various African states. And again, I wish I could say that this was easy. I wish it was easy, but it is not easy, but it is necessary. Okay? It is necessary and it has to be done. So we have to start somewhere and do it, because if we don't do it, it's going to be deadly for us. The United States is trying to rebuild. Where do you think they are going to get the resources from? They are going to. Europe is in crisis. They are in crisis. Where do you think they are going to get the resources from to continue? Because they are being chased out of the Chinese markets. Where do you think they're going to get their resources from to rebuild, Europe, which is going to go in chaos? They're counting on the vulnerable. And who's the vulnerable? Is Africa who's vulnerable? Is Africa who's vulnerable? President Macron recently made comments and said that the world is made up of carnivores and omnivores. So basically, I think he said herbivores, carnivores, and herbivores, or something like that. So what basically he meant is that the world is made up of the eaters and the eaten. That is what it was basically meaning. And he said that Europe does not want to be the eaten, will not be the eaten. Europe has to be the eater. So he left it there. So he brought it in a way that he didn't want the world to understand what he was saying, and he didn't want to alarm the world. But what he was saying is that the world is made up of the carnivores, which are the lions, and the leopards, which eat meat. And then it is made up of those ones which eat grass. And the carnivores, of course, they feed on the ones which are eating grass, which are in the bush. All right. So he said that Europe does not want to be the ones which is eaten. It has to be the ones which is eating. So this is a crisis. The African continent is in a crisis. We are facing an existential crisis. Survival is not guaranteed. This is the report. This is actually what the African Development Bank report said, that the survival of the continent is not guaranteed. So looking at this situation, then we have to do something about it. We have to get power and reconstruct the continent. So the plan for us is very clear. We have to fight for political power. Two, then we start laying the foundation, because the foundation is non-existent. There's no foundation on the African continent that you can talk of that is going to compete with the rest of the world. Number one, a railway platform. We need a railway platform across the continent, all over the African continent. We need a railway platform that integrates all the African countries, or at least 80% of the African countries. But it should be a railway platform that integrates all the African continent. That is number one. Because if you're talking about the African, free trade area, it means nothing if you don't have a railway platform where you are moving the goods from. And you are not going to move those goods with aircraft. all over and be trading. You are not going to do it. You don't even have enough aircraft to do it. First of all, Ethiopia Airlines, which is the biggest airline on the continent, now is in crisis because Boeing cannot deliver aircraft. Ethiopia Airlines is facing problems. So now, how are you going to move the goods? If Ethiopia Airlines, your biggest airline, does not even have enough aircraft to move people and to expand globally, how are you going to move these goods now? So it is not possible to move even the goods with air because it will be extremely expensive. So we are looking at the first stage is to build a radar platform. Second stage, and of course, the radar platform will come with other industries like expanded cement production and steel, because steel is a very critical component if you are talking about building a civilization. Concrete, steel, and concrete. Concrete is basically steel and stone. All civilization, Egyptian civilization is standing there because of concrete. It's because of concrete. So it's not because of anything. It's concrete, building. So these are critical. Now, the radio platform for us will come with establishing of a steel industry and expansion of cement production on the African continent. Number two, a communication platform. Okay, when the United States built its transcontinental railway network, which transcontinental railroad, which connected the east with the west, the eastern part of the continent of the United States with the east and the west, and they put a telegram along to communicate with the west, between the west and the east. So we think that along the railway platform we have to put a fiber optic cable for communication to integrate the communication network of the continent. We don't communicate with each other across this continent. Our calls go to Europe before they can come back to the continent. It is more expensive to call from Ghana to Ethiopia than it is to call from Ghana to Europe. And yet the same continent, which is
It's,
ridiculous.
it's
It's
true.
absolutely ridiculous. It is nuts. So this is
Same
the
way with
second.
our flights. It's more
Yes,
expensive to fly to Kenya from Addis than
absolutely.
flying
You see,
to
so
outside of the
so
continent.
when you are talking about developing an economy, the current order is wrong. The current leadership is wrong. Is going in the completely wrong direction. Completely wrong direction. These guys are not helping. They are not adding anything to the continent. All right, they are just sending us backwards, and they are saying that they are leading the continent. And the data is showing this. The data is showing that we are regressing. We are going backwards by 13%. Our economy is shrinking, is going backwards by 13%, 13.3%, instead of going forward. So this is a huge problem. All the work that is being done by the African people, the wealth is just being taken. All the energy that is being invested, people are taking the wealth from the continent. So this is a problem. So for us, we think that you get power, the first thing you do, establish a continental railway platform, build a continental railway platform. Number two, build a connection, a communication platform for the continent, an integrated communication platform, which is a fiber optic cable that will be laid across the railway where it is passing. Number three, expand the energy production on the continent, because we say that 600 million people don't have access to energy. At least 80% of 600 people, almost 50% of the people on the continent, or 60%, don't have access to electricity. And if you if you add where you have load shedding, then it could be almost like 75 or 80% don't have access to electricity. So you cannot develop the continent without energy. You cannot develop the continent without transportation. You can't move goods. You cannot have entrepreneurs. So if you don't have energy, you cannot produce. What are you going to produce without energy? Factories cannot run. You cannot industrialize. You cannot have cold
OCA
storage.
has actually a question about the Continental Railway.
Yes. So
Said,
let
how
me
can
come. Let
you?
me come to that.
Okay.
Let me come to that. So the energy platforms have to be built all across the continent, and our proposal is for us to look at building the Inga Dam in the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is a project that will cost around $80 billion, but it will produce around 40,000 megawatts. And some experts have predicted that this project can serve about 20% of Africa's population with energy. So that is the Inga Dam. Now, we are also proposing about four nuclear power platforms across the continent, in the east, in the west, in the north and in the south, at least 4 mega nuclear power plants which can produce up to 40,000 megawatts each. So if we have the dam in the middle, which is producing 40,000 megawatts, we have another nuclear power plant in the north, which is producing 40,000 megawatts. We have another, nuclear power platform in the west, which is again producing 40,000 megawatts. We have another nuclear platform in the eastern part of the continent, that one also, which is producing 40,000 megawatts. I think that this should be enough for you to take off. You have now laid the foundation for industrialization, because the foundation for industrialization is energy, communication, and transportation. So once you have these three, then you are ready to take off. Then we can have industrialization across the continent. Then trading can mean something, because we will have the products to trade in as a continent. So this is our plan, and it can be done, but we have to start with getting the political power, because without political power, you cannot implement this. All these things these good plans that all the ancestors had, the Nkrumahs, the George Padmos, all of them, the Robert Sobukwes, they were not implemented because of politics, because of political power. There's no political power, and those ones who wanted to implement them, they were removed from political power. So we have to get political power, and we have to fight for it. It's not going to drop from heaven, and it's not going to come to us when we are sitting down and crying and saying, oh, the things are not good, things are not going well. I think that it's not going to work that way. We have to fight for it, and that is the reality of it, unfortunately or fortunately.
Osia is saying, how can you build a continental railway while there is a conflict in DRC and Sudan?
Yeah, so the conflict is not a perpetual, is not a development project. Conflict is not a development project. So all the conflicts require, building consensus. But temporarily, of course, you could pass in the northern part as we have planned it. The project which we have planned does not pass even where the conflict is in itself. It passes in the north, but you have to look at the conflict itself as a phenomenon or a situation that can be solved with politics. It is dialogue which is required, because there's a lot of underlying issues of why the conflict is there in the Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo, and those underlying issues have not been touched, which are historical, imperialist, problems in there. All these are being aided by weak leadership. So if you have the right leadership, these problems they should go away easily. They will not be there.
Industrial Africa Solutions have a question which is, governments, it look like they will not cooperate, so we need billionaires like Dangote.
No, Dangote even himself, he can't do it alone. Dangote needs functional governments. Dangote cannot operate. Even you can see how they are frustrating him in Nigeria, that the government cannot even come out to protect him. So money is not the solution. The money is not the solution. The first solution, money is a solution, but it's not the primary solution. The primary solution is to have Pan-African governments in power. That is the primary solution. Then these governments will give the private sector, the Africa's private sector, to operate as it should. Then these Pan-African governments will allow the diaspora to come and take their place. Okay, then entrepreneurs will spring up, then factories will spring up, then African businesses will be protected all across the continent, because right now they are not protected. They are only overtaxed. They are not protected. African entrepreneurs and businesses are collapsed to make way for foreigners to take over economies. So money alone cannot operate this, cannot solve this problem, because it is not the primary solution. The primary solution is political power. Once you get political power, then you will be able to put everything in order. And it's the same thing, actually, what Nkrumah said. Seek ye first the political kingdom. That's what basically Nkrumah meant. Seek ye first the political kingdom, and all the other things shall be added unto you. So that is basically what Nkrumah is meaning, that when you get Pan-Africanists in power, when you get Pan-African governments in power, then they will be able to correct all these mistakes of going to IMF, going to World Bank. There's no reason why you should be going to the World Bank when you have all these resources. And in Magufuli, people like Magufuli, President Magufuli, they demonstrated it. And they did a lot in just 5 years without going to the IMF. So this is not rocket science. What we just need is we need people who are uncompromising, when it comes to the interests of the African people and the interests of the African continent. Mallet, you are muted.
Thank you. I would have continued like that for 20 minutes. So you said, look, as Dr. Kwame Nkrumah famously said, seek your first political kingdom only by taking control of the political and economic levels of power can Africa truly begin its journey towards self-reliance and prosperity. The Pan-African movement must be reignited, and the African Continental Unity Party stands ready to lead the charge. And you have explained how that will be done, how you plan to tackle this. Now, the revolution is not a distant dream, it's a pressing reality that demands our immediate attention and unwavering commitment. Let us not wait another 108 years. Africa's future depends on the action we take today. Now, very shortly or briefly, what is that everyday action people can take, like ordinary citizens? We don't have to have platform, or we don't have to be part of the government or whatever, the elite group, but as just simple individual, what can we do to contribute to achieve this goal, so that us and our children do not wait another 100 years?
Yeah, so number one, I think that come and support the African Continental Unity Party. The stage where we are is we are mobilizing. We are calling all people of all capabilities, because the fact that we have a vision, the fact that somebody has a vision, it does not mean that the person claims to know everything. We don't claim to know everything, and that is why we are inviting actually
Mhm.
all people, from all walks of life. Mallet has supported with the media platform and all the other ways. Come and register and let's work together. We are calling professionals, we are calling intellectuals, we are calling entrepreneurs, businessmen. Come and support, come and have a dialogue. Let us dialogue and see how we can rebuild the continent. Visit our website as the African Continental Unity Party at www.africanscup.org, www.africanscup.org. So that is the website. Go out there and register and give us a call. You can write to Mallet here. She will bring us the message, and we will reach out to you, and let's work together, because nothing is going to happen until the political structure is changed on the African continent. And I encourage you to go also out and go and read this report of the African Development Bank. It's very clear on what must be done, actually. It says that the political structure is not favoring the continent. The current pace, the current approach is sending the continent backwards. It is not making any improvements on the African continent, and it has to be changed. It has to be changed. So whether we want it or not, whether we are going to do it or not, it has to be changed. That is the fact of the matter. So it's better that we do it. It's better that we work together and do it and confront the problem once and for all. We have a secretariat currently in Ghana with about 4 members who are constantly working. They are full-time members. We need people to come and support these members so that they can continue the Pan-African work. I mean, in form of finance, we need to finance them every day, every single day, which they are carrying out of this work. So this is extremely important. So if you are out there and you have the capability, you can contribute something. If you can contribute, $50, $100 every month to help these people continue the work, I think this will be very, very important. It will be very welcome. Of course, you can teach the children, you can do all these things. You can educate your children, you can talk to your neighbor who is an African about these issues. But the ultimate solution for us is taking power, political power. If we can take political power, whether in Ghana, then that can give us a situation where we have a center of gravity. We have created a center of gravity. If we talk to Mali, then if we talk to Niger, we talk to Burkina Faso, and we get help, either way, all these, they could help. but we need to build a center of gravity, at least in Ghana, where we are actively involved right now, South Africa and Sierra Leone, Ethiopia, where we are opening up space. So all these, we need to find a way of building a strong Pan-African movements there, with the ultimate goal of unifying the continent and building this infrastructure that we rightly spoke about. So come out there and support Pan-African work, support Connect Africa, support anything Pan-African, and support the work that the African Continental Unity Party is doing, because this is the only way we are going to come out of this challenge that we are facing. Thank you very much, Mahlet.
Thank you, Kwame. With that, I'd like to say, please go ahead and support. We have put here the website, African Continental Unity Party. It's made very easy last time when we have all the three people, including Kwame. We have showed, kind of demonstrated how to donate. So you can easily donate to that so that they can continue to work to serve and, curve this 108 years of crazy thing which the African Development Bank is talking about, which can be true if we don't do our homework. Well, a quick shout out, CNDS, thank you for coming. Industrial African Solution, Ping One, who as Osie, I hope your questions are answered. Male Ramasodi, all of you, thank you so much. And Mokpe Native. So we say hello back to you. Please go ahead and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done that so far. Give it a like. It helps for the YouTube algorithm. And share the video with others. That's the best way for us, to reach as many people as possible. And you may support further also through PayPal account. You can find it in the description section. That was it for today. And until we see you next time, it's bye-bye from us. Thank you, Kwame. Ciao.